So in this video, we're going to look at the early formation of colonial hierarchy and the foundation of American culture. One of the problems, or one of the situations that we have in the early colonies, is that there are few nobles and medieval hierarchy is no longer influential. So what that means is what we are used to in the Middle Ages of the church acknowledging the nobles as rightful rulers is not occurring in the colonies. So how does hierarchy form, and how does status form? So that is going to be the question of this video. I'd like to begin with a compare and contrast between Catholicism and Calvinism. And the reason for this is because those influenced by Catholicism, that being Spain and its colonies, remain in a pre-modern state. Those influenced by Protestantism, mainly Calvinism, the United States and a little bit of Great Britain, move forward into the modern world, and that has other repercussions as we move forward into the centuries. So to begin with the foundation of Catholicism, Catholicism is what I like to say is Judeo-Christianity. Its magisterium wants to hold on to the concept that the Old Testament and New Testament are not separate ideas or separate new religions. They're a fulfillment of the other, and they require the other for that fulfillment. For instance, the idea of Jesus being the sacrificial lamb, all these ideas are Jewish concepts of the early church fathers, and so they carry with them many of the traditions of the Jewish tradition, and we'll get to some of those traditions that they carry with them. So the point is that Catholicism does not want to separate the Old Testament to the New Testament as one replacing the other. Okay, so that is one of the main tenets about this. As I said before, when I use the word magisterium, what I mean is church teaching. And much of the church teaching has really held together and blossomed within the universities or within certain saints who study the scriptures and held to some ideas of the early church fathers, one being St. Augustine and another being Thomas Aquinas. The problem that the Middle Ages has is a problem of illiteracy and the problem of holding on to ancient traditions of Judaism and understanding history. Those were problems in the Middle Ages, and I'd say there's still problems today. This is a very complex religion that requires a deep understanding of both Judaism and the scriptures and how they are fulfilled within the Christian concept. That's not to say that this religion isn't a simple religion. It is in the terms of the simple concept that God came into the world and his sacrifice atoned for the sins of many. But the ethical and day-to-day interaction of a person, of how they interact with the world, is still rooted in Judaism. Like I'd make a point that there really isn't a lot different of what Jesus is saying in the Gospels that hasn't really been said before in the ancient texts of Judaism. What you can say is the authority that he says with it, and the conviction of him fulfilling what you might call the living temple within his body, and the resurrection of a new creation. So that's where things get a little bit complicated in terms of the church having to deal with this issue. So one of their counter reformations, or how they are going to try to solve this problem of teaching Catholicism to the poor and to the uneducated and so forth, is to create what they call the Jesuits. And they are now these priestly scholars who are given the task of educating the lay people, those who are not priests. And to this very day, the Jesuits are still part of the Catholic Church in trying to maintain this rich tradition that is rooted in its history. So the part of the magisterium I like to focus here in this time is the concept of work and life. For Catholicism, work meant an action that fulfills your life. For instance, when you farm and that grain is yours, and you've baked that bread that belongs to you, that's not to say that the land belonged to the nobles and the nobles ate first. What it meant is that they weren't necessarily used for labor for a certain type of product and for a certain type of profit. That wasn't on this mindset at the time. Being a peasant was necessarily meant hard work, and what made it so difficult back then was a lack of technology and the lack of innovation in terms of how they were farming. So when bad harvests did show up, most likely they were the ones that got the brunt of it. And that was a reoccurring problem in many of their experiences. What the Catholic Church wanted to encourage in the New World is the hacienda or the encomienda, which is pretty much the same as the pretty much the same here as the manure system, except they have these Native Americans that they employed, and then you have here the church and the agricultural land. So the best way for us to summarize this is the Catholic Church believed in an agricultural economy. This is going to come up later on with Thomas Jefferson in a new type of modern way, but they knew what capitalism meant, early forms of capitalism meant. They understood the concept of money and investment. They just didn't believe that that was a forward way to go. And so what they, as I mentioned earlier in another video, they deemed it as usury, as a form of sin. So for the Catholic point of view, using money to make your product, to make your profit, was considered cheating. Money shouldn't work for you. You should work for whatever your hands make and whatever feeds you in that sense. They saw the concept of exploitation, and that is what they were trying to avoid in their ideas. So they were against modernism, as they saw it in terms of banking, cities, and so forth. They're afraid that once people were working for money and money was working for them, that the individual would become focused on worldly goods, worldly status, and not focused on the next world. Another emphasis was that as much as they have this concept of the peasant, they held on to the Jewish concept that the poor and the orphans are the responsibility of society. They're looked upon as needing of charity. And lastly, as I mentioned before, the idea of work being part of your experience in life. So here I have Spain, and here we have the influence of Spain, and here we have the encomienda. So up to about the 18th century, many of these Spanish-influenced societies did not enter the modern world because of that Catholic influence of being agricultural. Okay, while the other, Great Britain and the United States, they develop a more modern economy that is the foundation of our economy today. So now that you got a little bit of an idea of Catholicism and their idea of the future at this time being agriculture, we're going to look at Calvinism. And Calvinism separates from a concept of magisterium, or having a tradition rooted in understanding the Old Testament and New Testament. What their emphasis is on the individual being literate and being able to read for themselves the Bible, and being able to discern and interpret for themselves, with a concept of them being filled with the Holy Spirit. And so therefore, as they read it, they're able to understand it and interpret it correctly. There's no need for a hierarchy of priests or bishops or even a pope. The problem with this is that it may be used out of context, in which people can justify their actions by taking out verses in the Bible and using it however they see fit to make a point. But the Calvinists would turn around and say that as they're reading, they're being inspired by the Holy Spirit and through their faith, and therefore this wouldn't be a problem. We do get a separation from the Jewish tradition. The idea of Jewish history, what we call eschatology. I'm sorry about that. And it's the whole idea of how the Old Testament is setting up for the New Testament, for the arrival of Jesus. This kind of breaks away from American tradition. in which the New Testament is being more emphasized than anything else. Um, the Puritans do have a different concept of what holiness means, or what does it mean to be righteous. One of the things they're looking at is an internal holiness and eternal discipline. So avoiding sin, meaning avoiding vices or bad habits of the individual. What gets left away or behind is a responsibility towards the poor and the society, and the bigger concept of what is going to happen to society if it becomes more worldly. These, without the magisterium or tradition, these concerns are no longer unified together and talked about. So what you get from a Puritan is a highly devoted person at self purification, making sure that they are not doing anything bad to their bodies, or over drinking, or sometimes in the case they drop drinking altogether at once. Um, so the focus is more on the individual and not necessarily the collective community. However, they do want to create a holy community uh, that is centered on putting religion first, but not like in the case of in Massachusetts with the Puritans, but not necessarily with some kind of overreach and tradition of someone guiding the community. So, what are the consequences that we see because of Calvinism and Protestantism on England, even before we set into the New World? Hard work is for production. Hard work is not for the individual's creation. It's for the production of profit. With the concept of enclosure, and we had mentioned that in the previous video, there are the new poor. And Calvinist has a different attitude towards the poor when they have this concept of predestination. The poor are seen as non-blessed, and those who do have, or those who find themselves in a situation in this new economy of having money and the means to invest and so forth, are in the favor of God. Okay, so that's one concept. The next concept that they're going to be using in both, this is a European thing, not necessarily a Calvinist thing, but we'll see how this gets applied, is the idea of husbandry. So many people have this idea of what we call breeds. Like certain families have a certain type of breed or a certain type of blessedness. The English, of course, are going to look at themselves as the top breed, and we already see, looking down upon the Irish, the Catholic Irish, as being a lower breed, and so therefore you lose that sense of responsibility for them, and you have a sense of exploitation. So early exploitation of the Irish begins with this concept that they are of lower birth, or of less value. And so many of the poor are looked upon as eyesores in society, as untrustworthy, unblessed. There's cases of the poor being shipped over by the government, by the English crown, to the New World as indentured servants. People are stolen, kidnapped, and sold as indentured servants to the New World. Some people are just fleeing because of the exploitation that's occurring in Ireland. We also see the same thing with the Scottish. Even though the Scottish themselves are Protestant, just the fact that they're poorer and and have less opportunity, they're seen as a burden to society, not a responsibility. So the question emerges: what does England do with its poor? And we'll see how they solve that problem in the New World. So to give a quick summary of the influence of Calvinism, who I keep using the same word, Puritan. The attitude to the New World of the early Puritans is that those who are wealthy are seen as more blessed, as predetermined to be blessed. They believe in a hard individual discipline. Salvation is through faith and not through responsibility of the other. There's that loss of the Jewish tradition. And people can be exploited if they are born of a lower breed. This concept of having a better breed, just like in terms of the animals, is now being applied to human beings. And lastly, and most importantly, work is a matter of status. So if you're working hard, then you are of lower status. If you're not working as hard, then you are blessed.